I'll say hello and welcome to all of you. This is the Dealmaking panel, and we have a fabulous group of experts who are going to share all of their information about how to make a wonderful deal and the best deal for you. In order to give you the most information possible, we're just going to briefly introduce ourselves, and then please look at the online bios, if you can find them, to learn much more about us. My name is Melissa Lewis, and I'm an entertainment lawyer who's worked in feature films, television, and new technology, and I also work as a consultant. So shall we start with you, Todd? Yeah. Sorry. Jeez.
What would you like me to say?
Just your name and
hi.
rank and serial number.
Okay. I'm Todd Garner. I'm a movie producer and television producer. I was 10 years at the Walt Disney Company and then 5 years at Revolution Studios, and our company has been oh, geez, I'm sorry, okay. All right, hi. And I was at 10 years at Disney and 5 years at Revolution, and then my company has been in business for 12 years.
Hi, I'm Jessica Kanter. I'm currently general counsel at Newform, which is a digital company focused on short-form premium content. Before that, I was at Legendary, where I was vice president of business and legal affairs, focusing on both film and television. And previous to that, I started my career off at Shepard Mullen.
Hi there, this is Brian Beckman. I'm the CFO of ArcLight Films. Been with ArcLight for about 10 years now. We specialize in international productions as well as sales, and I'm happy to be here with all the rest of these great panelists.
Hi, I'm Hannah Pillemer. I run the feature content division at Mar Vista Entertainment, and Mar Vista is a financier, production company, and worldwide distributor. And before that, I was on the team at HBO Films.
I'm Andrew Sugarman. I'm an independent producer. I do mostly feature films. I do some television. I've been doing this for a very long time. So I can't really tell you about my prior employment because this is what I've been doing pretty much all my life.
But you don't look a day old.
Thank you.
Spring chicken.
There we go. So I'm in the independent sphere, but I've been doing a lot of films that ultimately get distributed by major studios. So I kind of crossed over both sides.
Hi, I'm Justin Hochberg. My wife calls me the Forrest Gump of business, which if you're married, you know is partially mocking me, but hopefully some tiny modicum of support. I run an independent TV company that focuses on high-profile TV and digital content, so over the top. I got my start helping develop a show called The Apprentice, which is a creative statement, not a political statement. I have nothing to do with Harvey Weinstein, but I'm going to find out if someone on the panel does here. And I would like to know before we get started who's actually in the audience in terms of, is it producers, is it independent people, just to get a feel for what the, so if you're an independent producer, can you raise your hand just to get a sense of it? Okay. If you're somebody else, can you raise your hand? Great.
Well, I was going to break down the something. That's
fantastic.
Good.
It's the second group of people I want to speak to most here. So.
Well, mine was a little bit more broken down. So content creators, and I guess are the same as the producers, and then talent, and then industry executives, agents, and lawyers. The dark side. No, just kidding. Just
They didn't even want to raise their hand. Like,
well, welcome all of you. We're glad to have you here. So since we have a lot of independent producers, content creators, let's start out with content. Jeffrey Katzenberg recently told the New York Times that his newest company is going to concentrate on short-form, 6 to 10-minute entertainment that's going to be going to mobile. So how much of this has, do you think, has short form affected the deals that you're doing? And if so, how? The short form wave. This is open to everyone.
Sure. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, as a market entry strategy, it's a very tried and true thing, right? If I'm not mistaken, pretty much everybody 10 years ago or 5 years ago who got into digital said they were going to do short form. Thus, they didn't seem like a competitor to long form, right? YouTube said that, and now YouTube Red, their subscription service, is doing the same thing as Netflix or HBO. I do think that we're at an interesting time in terms of content in every brand because the millennial audience is consistently rejecting most established brands that we probably all grew up with, whether it's toothpaste or insurance or renting cars or glasses, from Warby Parker to Uber, et cetera. And so in as much as if you were going to build a brand new studio to target the most sought after group of people, Jeffrey Katzenberg is someone you might want to bet on, given that he's reinvented this business for many times, whether it was animation or DreamWorks. So I would bet on him, and I think the fact that he's raising, what, $1 billion more, $2 billion as his seed capital?
I think he raised 600 million.
Well, then he'd probably going to fail
fell
with
short,
just that
but
amount. Yeah.
More than they, yeah.
But I think listen, more people starting, if you're going to build a studio from scratch, you would never do it like you did 20 years ago, much less 50 years ago, with all the physical plant and all the sort of legacy issues. So I'm behind the idea of somebody reinventing new content specifically for mobile. A lot of people say they're doing it. Somebody's going to crack it. Someone will be the Netflix of, short form / the mobile device, and it probably won't be Netflix.
Yeah, what he's doing is he's not sure yet if it's going to be a subscription model or if it's going to be a strictly ad model. But if you look at, the YouTube influencers, they're already producing short form content. It's, as Jeffrey said, it's just more of like a quick hit. It's not what he wants to do, which is he wants to do really high quality. I think he actually said he wanted to be the Pixar of short form. There is obviously money to be made in short-form content. Logan Paul and his brother and that whole coterie of influencers certainly are making a lot of money doing it. And I think what Jeffrey is realizing is that content itself is just that now, and that each story that you want to tell, whether you're a talent or an independent producer, now will have pretty much any length and period of time to be able to tell that story. So if it's 100 episodes of 5 minutes, as opposed to, one series of Game of Thrones, if you could break up a story and it made sense to tell each one of those episodes in 5 to 10 minutes, then obviously now, given YouTube Red and these other services, and now Jeffrey's, site that he's creating, you'll have an opportunity to be able to tell those stories there, and also in reality and unscripted as well.
I just want to echo on something that Todd just said, and that is that the difference I think that Jeffrey's taking is that he's focusing on high quality content, which is very unusual right now because there's a lot of players out there that are producing a lot of low quality stuff that's out there, and it's kind of really giving a bad name to content on the internet. And so I think Jeffrey's trying to capitalize on the marketplace that doesn't exist yet. And I think that's where the industry needs to drive to. But there's a balance there between economics and content or quality. And it'll be interesting to see how Jeffrey is able to make those two balance. Because right now the economics don't really support the higher quality. That's why you have so much out there that's this low quality stuff that, it's just, it's somebody with an iPhone in the back of his, garage doing stuff. And that's great, that's fantastic. It shows a lot of creativity on an independent level. But where Jeffrey really, it appears that he wants to take it is to that next level. Whether that can be done or not is yet to be seen. I'd love to see that economic model.
Well, that's the problem, is the issue in terms of what this panel's about, which is about deal making, is going to be interesting because if you think about like the influencers and the content that they're making that doesn't cost anything, they're just taking an iPhone out like Jenna Marbles or somebody like that, then their margins are bigger because it's not costing them anything and they're reaping all the rewards of their ad sales. The more unless there's an increase in the monetization of the short form content, what you're going to do is as you increase the quality and make it cost more, Jeffrey's no fool, he's not going to be loss leader for very long, your deals are going to get squeezed. So in a way, like the Logan Pauls and the Jenna Marbles, they're actually like the kind of Jason Blums of the internet right now, where the margins are big. So the thing will be interesting to be aware of is if somebody like Darren Aronofsky or somebody decides he wants to tell, a story in 100 parts and make it a jigsaw puzzle, is Jeffrey going to be able to make any money doing that if it costs $300,000 or $400,000 every 5 minutes.
But isn't this just a marketing ploy? I mean, like, this is not an innovative idea, right? I mean, people have been talking about short form for 20 plus years since Yahoo, right? So there's nothing new about this. It gets more play because it's Jeffrey, but like, I don't even really believe it's short form, right? I just believe he's trying to create some white space that makes it seem like he's not taking Netflix on head on, and he's basically saying, I need a lot of money to go get A players to do what they normally do. And it's just a hook. I actually don't really believe it.
You're just segmenting it.
That's it, because it's not even really short form, because the only way to make any sort of play is to have people show up again and again and again.
That's right. It's just a subscription service.
And that's what I was going to say, is that, the way that we're exploring it is still, it has to be franchisable, it has to be serialized content, it has to, hold interest over a long period of time. So it is still looking at it, it's just how you're consuming it. And as far as the deal goes, on our side at Mar Vista, we are exploring this. We're actually looking at potentially purchasing a digital distribution platform that is still kind of in its early stages, but it's specifically in a branded content capacity. So I think the short form that we would do would be in partnership, most likely with brands. So
I think the impact is zero, actually, on deal making, because like I'm looking at YouTube. I've done some work with them, YouTube Red, YouTube. They're doing shows because they're not bound by 30, 60, 90, whatever it is. The Kevin Hart show that they greenlit, right? Kevin Hart could be on any platform. He's an A-plus candidate. They're paying network-style budget. That show, I think, is going to be 15 minutes, right? That's the entire show. When you strip down a network show, an hour TV, to the essence of what you care about, it's 15 minutes of Kevin Hart having a good time working out with people, and that's it. So what's any different about that? There's nothing.
And The Rock's doing it as well.
That's right.
The Rock has a channel, and I think those things are also reverse engineering for their brands too. Is their brands are feeding into each other. So there's a positive marketing side on, like, when The Rock is going to promote his next movie, Skyscraper. He's got this YouTube channel now that he can just kind of cross promote with, and that also saves. Will save legendary money
when it comes out. Well, it's true. I mean, the one thing that I really have to agree with everyone on the panel is that short form is not new. When you wrap it up and it's Jeffrey and it's WonderCo, it feels new and fresh and sexy, but at the end of the day, it's really content that's king. And we've seen that happen with Hulu right now in the biggest example. And the deals that I'm making are both short form and long form, and it's the same structures, right? You're dealing with the same pot, you're dealing with the same money that you're splitting up in different ways for upfront. We're doing deals with both YouTube Red, and we're also doing sometimes deals that are, and that's 22 minutes, or we're doing something else that's maybe 3 minutes or 6 minutes on an emerging digital platform. But I thought that it's a really interesting point as well, is you're seeing brand building, and you're seeing reverse engineering, and really this different type of star and what they can bring to something for a larger company's P&A campaign as well.
I wanted to briefly welcome Perrin to the panel.
Sorry for being late, guys.
And we were discussing short form and how it's affected deal making and negotiations and anything of that nature.
Sure. Just to chime in, I'm a big fan of what Jeffrey threw out there. I think it's a great North Star for us in terms of being able to think about creating a new marketplace and a new format. I'm the CEO of Adaptive Studios, and we actually are deficit financing and producing upwards of 50 projects per year on the short form. And from a deal-making standpoint, we are licensing that content as it exists, but then also retaining rights to upstream. And I think that's a really important distinguisher in terms of how creators and people are thinking about this new marketplace, because it really is about trying to create franchise value, even if it's something as experimental or seemingly as experimental as a 100-minute series or a 60-minute series. But in fact, it is the seed for something much bigger. And I think that's what we're really excited about, is being able to identify up-and-coming filmmakers that are willing to embrace this medium. And we're finding that we can't finance or produce this fast enough to sell it, is our view.
Just to add to that, I mean, the people that I'm talking to from the creative standpoint, we look at it as kind of a level of an incubator, and that is to kind of test and feel the waters out for particular, creators and producers that are making stuff out there that might have a different spin. And this is a way that it gives it like an incubator feel, as in, Is it something that can hatch into something bigger? Can we turn it into a feature? Can we turn it into a series that goes into more of the traditional distribution models that we all know about? But utilizing the short form and digital distribution in a way to do brand extension, the incubator, and moving into the higher quality level are all things that are developing right now. I don't think that you're going to see anything really happen and pop in the next probably 2 to 3 years, but 10 years from now, it's going to be a force that we're all going to have to deal with.
Well, speaking of up and coming, if anyone on the panel, were going to talk about the differences in deals for influencer talent and traditional talent, how would you describe it?
Are they represented or not?
Who knows? Well, what would the difference be in a deal if you were doing a deal with someone who wasn't represented? How would that differ from the deal with the person that was, other than the fact that the one with represented would probably get a better deal?
No, not true at all.
Oh.
So the big difference that I've seen in my transition is I was very used to working with a team of representation, right? For A+ talent, even B, even C, right? Traditional talent, you have a manager, an agent, and a lawyer, and you are negotiating really for someone's fee, back end, and their perks. And depending if it's franchisable, we'd like a number of options on that as well. Sorry, I don't know if it can hear me. Okay, so I was just saying the difference. Previously, I was used to dealing with a team of representatives, and you're really focusing on someone's fixed fee, their back end, options, perks, things like that, a fight over credit as well. And where you see a major difference is when I will first begin negotiating with talent, they're often not represented. But let's say once a big deal is made, then all of a sudden we now have an agent, a lawyer, and manager. And you want to be very thoughtful in these discussions. You want to make sure that you're being as fair as possible as you're explaining to someone kind of the rules of the road. And the big difference you see as well all comes in marketing. Previously, if I was making a deal for A+ talent, I would not put aside a pot of money for them to go to the premiere, to travel to China, to appear at Comic-Con. That was all part of the huge fee that they were getting paid for the movie, right? Or for any TV work. However, for digital, what you're thinking about right away is how are they going to use their audience to bring an audience for your show and for that emerging platform that the show will be on. So you want to include in there all types of social media activation, and you want to look at, well, where does their audience live, on what platform, and often you will negotiate separate fees for the different activations they will be doing. And that was never part of the equation previously, and it's also really making sure that you are working with this individual as they're emerging onto the scene and figuring out their next steps. So it's much more of a partnership when you're working with someone individually as well. And so that's what I've encountered. I defer to the rest of the panel in terms of what they've seen as well.
Well, I'd like to hear what Todd has to say after Hannah says whichever she has to say, since he thought that possibly...
That yes, that we've experienced the same thing, and it surprised me because the kind of the whole idea behind working with an influencer and having someone like that in a film, for example, is because of that following and being able to leverage their social media presence. So we stumbled a bit when we weren't monetizing those steps, and then we weren't getting that marketing support that we needed on the back end of the film. So where we've landed now is that we actually have to incentivize.
Yes. So it was so surprising because before in the world, and apologies, I'm in your way, but before we would never think, oh, I'm going to have to pay Chris Hemsworth more, or I'm going to have to pay...
of course he wants to promote his movie.
Of course he wants to go on Jimmy Kimmel, right? I mean, of course, Tom Hiddleston wants to go to Comic-Con, right? I'm not going to have... That's not a separate fee, but... It's incredibly different when you're working in the influencer world because that's what they've built their value upon. And so every movement is an incremental cost. Yep. So it's how to reverse engineer that into your deal making as well, because what they're bringing, and it's a very valid argument, they're bringing an audience.
Right, but that's only, I mean, that's, to me, that's pretty transparent, which is, in an old model, talent just was talent. They showed up and they acted, or they wrote, or they directed. Now you're basically saying there's people who are distribution platforms. So that, if you want my distribution platform, then you need to pay. I mean, that's no different than them saying if CBS wants, and that's the difference. Now, I did a show last year for YouTube Red. It was I think their first show they did that did not include an influencer as the main driver. It was Mariah Carey, DJ Khaled. It was called The Keys of Christmas. And their whole premise was they wanted people, even from the traditional side, Mariah Carey, DJ Khaled, they wanted them to do the marketing of it, right? They had X number of whatever they needed them to do on social media. And some of them did it, and some of them didn't really do it. So you never fully get what you're paying for, and it's difficult to actually legislate that. And ultimately, the current talent, so Dwayne Johnson has larger pull than all of Paramount Studios, right? They need him more than he needs them, because he's now a distribution network.
Right, well, that's the other thing is all of the influencers that are really influencers have that trust and that relationship with their audience that there are no representation. There is no, it's transparent. There is no, behind the scenes working there. So I remember when a bunch of my manager friends went after Jenna Marbles, she said no, she didn't need him because she was making her own deals. It was right on the, she saw her clicks on her YouTube channel. Eventually, she ultimately did get representation, but for that first period of time while she was building her audience, it was important for her that she was not selling out. You could not get her to talk about a movie or anything like that, and a lot of people tried. And once they start doing that, once you start hearing those influencers talk about Dove soap or whatever, and it can instantly go away. So yeah, so when you're making a deal and there's representation, obviously managers and agents are going to be wanting to bring in brands and align you with certain brands, and it certainly hasn't hurt The Rock. But in terms of just influencer talent, you're paying definitely for the channel as much as you are for the person saying the message.
The one thing I wanted to comment on is my work is mostly in long form. I don't know if this is on. Oh, there it is. It's mostly in long form and in short form, but there's a big effect that the influencers and the social media, the people who are strong in social media with large followings are having an effect on the casting process in long form, both in features and in television, because now you talk to casting directors and and actors who are coming in for auditions, and one of the, it's not exactly an open question, but one of the concerns that people have is, okay, what's your social media following? And so there's a crossover now, because there's a lot of the people who are influencers or have some presence in social media or in short forms are looking to get into television, either with the content or with their own personal performances. And so it's starting to cross over where the marketing people at studios and television networks are seeing the social media presence as having a strong power for them being able to market the cast. So,
but does that really work? I mean, I have yet to see an example where it matters, to be honest with you, because like CBS did on these Survivor or Amazing Race, I can't remember which, only social media stars in some season. The idea that there was some billion number of like followers on these 20 some odd contestants, ratings were exactly the same. Why? Because nobody who follows Tyler Oakley is watching CBS, right? Like that's the disconnect, right? So it only works if you're in the same lane where the followers are. It doesn't work to take social media people and put them on Dancing with Stars and then expect that to boost the ratings. So I haven't seen it work.
Well, where I think it's having more effect is less in broadcast network shows and in streaming and over-the-top services, where there's a lot more crossover.
That I would understand.
Because a lot of the people who are now only getting their feeds through over-the-top or through internet, they're not watching the traditional broadcast shows, and there's more crossover there because there's cross-marketing between those platforms.
That I completely understand.
And I agree with everything Justin's saying. And we experienced this on a film that we did for Netflix, where we cast a kind of combination of traditional actors, actresses, as well as social media influencers, and did so in a way where I think talent was on the influencer side was a nice to have, not a need to have. And it really was about the acting, but we knew that there was something inherently valuable from Netflix's view in having, a combined presence of 10 million in social media followers, and that actually did work for us. But I do agree that it has to be, thought of as native to where that audience is going, whether that's on Netflix or on HBO, et cetera, YouTube Red, and that's a big difference than, a CBS for that matter.
You bring up a good point about an aspect of demographics that the influencers are part of. And one thing that, with so many creative people in the audience, you have to remember that influencers affect for the most part, in localized areas of demographics. Some of them have a huge presence in Asia. It might be only in Thailand. It might be Australia. It might be in the US. So when you're looking at those talent, because it is such a growing part of how we're making films nowadays, or content on the internet or where it might be, remember who your influencers are and what value that they really can contribute, because they might be huge somewhere, but they might mean no value somewhere else.
But also, it's also what are those influencers known for, right? If it's apples to apples, so for Shay Mitchell, who was on Pretty Little Liars, or The Rock, or Kevin Hart, they're known for acting and being a comedian. Or if some guy's walking around getting hit with a stick and has 20 million followers, and then you put him in a movie, the kids who like to see him get hit by a stick, I don't think that translates. And I think that's the thing that where studios specifically get lost, is they just see numbers. They don't understand that it has to be consistent. The branding and the message has to be consistent, or it's not going to work. And so, you gotta wonder, when you start to pull these guys into traditional media, you got to be really careful, because it can be definitely a lose-lose with certain situations.
Let me just even add fuel to that fire. If you think about YouTube Red's initial launch strategy, it was dominated by creating long-form, high-cost content for existing influencers, right? It's taking the people that are already on their network and giving them more money and a bigger platform and a billboard at the Grove. They are no longer doing that because that wasn't translated. Why? Because people could always watch that free stuff anywhere, and yes, certainly it might have been better, maybe not, but they'd seen it. It wasn't unique. Now what's YouTube Red doing? They're doing the same thing Netflix is doing, or Hulu. They're trying to find their Handmaid's Tale, or Game of Thrones, or House of Cards, right? So, I think if you've learned anything in the last 2 years, it's that influencers do not equal traditional media talent. There are some that become great because they're just great, but it has nothing to do with them being an influencer.
Right.
All right, well, speaking of traditional talent, Hannah, your company is currently doing 4 films, I believe, with Elijah Wood's production company. What is it like when you have celebrity talent attached to deals in a non-on-camera function?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we actually just completed the second film in our slate with them, titled Corpse Tub. Our first one was Bitch, so we're sticking with the good titles. But what really our primary
Hopefully
purpose...
the C word is not next. Sorry.
No, that's not in. I won't allow that. But what we've found, and really our primary reason for entering into the relationship with SpectraVision was to diversify Mar Vista's content and just kind of raise our credibility in the creative space. Because our challenge, we make so many movies of all different levels, but we really hadn't yet had a real presence on the festival circuit, and again, just trying to continue to draw interesting new talent into our forces. So Elijah, in that case, that was really where the value came. We were able to essentially have a spot secured for us at Sundance. So Bitch premiered at Sundance, and we're kind of being told that's going to happen again with Corpse Tub. So that really was our primary reason, and absolutely it has helped. But he brings a lot of other things to the table. He brings a lot of relationships to the table. So even not having him directly in the film has been hugely valuable. I will say, there are times when we have done this at Mar Vista and it has not worked. And for example, we had a movie with Darren Aronofsky producing, didn't come together. So it doesn't always.
I was right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, switching gear a little bit from talent, with so many reboots, revivals, and adaptions being made nowadays as a way to build built-in name recognition, what advice can you give for acquiring rights to existing properties, and what are the challenges involved?
I just want to go on record and say that I think the trend for acquiring rights is going to be the death. And I think it's a bad strategy, unless you're trying to not get fired. And here's my thought on it, as you segue into that, which is, I understand why a studio wants to get a superhero, a Marvel thing, because everybody can say it. But if you think about most of the things that we all love, think of your favorite show or book, most of it was something you personally discovered that was new. Right? That was your discovery. It wasn't something someone said, hey, you've seen this kind of before, watch it now, right? And that's ostensibly what they're saying by trying to build in all the intellectual property rights. Oh, you've loved this property for 30 years, now watch the umpteenth version of it. Now, you're never going to get fired for making that, but why independent movies tend to thrive, why new shows tend to be interesting, is because we love to discover it. It's riskier, you'll get fired for it as an executive, but in terms of as creators and producers, it's easy to say, we're all screwed. I don't own the rights to a superhero movie, how am I ever going to get anything made? You get something made because really good storytelling has always beaten that, even if that's the current trend in film, in my opinion. And so I get why they do it, but I don't agree with it, and I wouldn't be threatened by it if I were you guys.
I would agree with that totally, especially being somebody who's never done a sequel and never done a superhero movie. And I take the kind of, I think, the tougher road sometimes, which is getting things that I love made. And I believe in that, especially if you're an independent producer. I mean, the studios right now are I think, running in fear, because they don't know how to make choices and they don't know what the marketplace wants, and they're not really able to choose in an effective way what an audience will see. So they're churning out very big budget sequels and tentpoles that have a built-in return factor, because there is X number of audience. And now with China, which is rapidly going to become the biggest market in the world for movies and is behind us in terms of the creative curve, and where big action movies sell fantastically. So you can sell Transformers in China, whereas you're not going to sell it in the UK or France quite as well. Personally, I'm sticking with things that I love and I care about. As a producer, it takes years, if not more, of your life to actually get a project made, developed, made, and distributed. For me, it's got to be something I love, care about, and I feel like actually is going to make some difference in the world for having been made.
But if someone out there is getting anything with existing material, are there any tips that you can give them in terms of acquiring things, or what the challenges are?
I'd like to jump in
Yeah,
here
go ahead.
as the money-hungry whore, and that is that I go after everything that I could absolutely, positively do a sequel on.
I agree.
And I'm in the midst of doing a 3-part sequel right now, that it's just because of the success that I've had in Asia, and that's ArcLight's bread and butter really comes out of China and Asia. We spent the last 15 years really embedding into China, and so we've developed relationships and investors, and we know the industry inside and out. And so we take a look at, I hear a lot of everybody, most panels I go on, it seems like everybody takes a very Western approach to filmmaking, and I think that's really a disservice to creators such as yourself. And that is, it should be a global approach. Mm-hmm. And that is that you need to make movies that are going to be appealing for the entire world. And that's really, really hard. And if you can do that, then by all means, tap into that well 2 or 3 times, because all the momentum that you built up making that film, that you guys poured so hard into making it to cross platforms and territories. And so if it does hit, then yes, you should be going back to that. Doesn't mean that you have to make a crappy sequel. It means that it's your jobs to make a great movie and to make it so that people want to see it again and again and again after that. I mean, that's what our goal is. And in China right now, they are they're so thirsty for Western content. They love stuff like this. And so for us, that's one of our biggest bread and butters. And so when we go into a particular project, and a lot of the stuff, because it is, it goes over cross territories, it really hones in on a certain genre. And that's usually like a thriller or action, something like that. There are certain genres that are, certain categories that just do not translate well internationally. Quirky comedies.
But it's a little unfair, right? I mean, you're a well-moneyed machine, right? I mean, you just told me about 15 years you spent in China, which the average person couldn't do, right? I mean, if you're a giant entity, of course you want to exploit the intellectual property, right?
But if someone's acquiring rights, they just might want to go after getting as much as they human on a nuts and bolts level of deal making.
What we're doing is all independent films. I mean, we're not competing with the legendaries or those individuals out there just because I just don't have the resources to do that. So we have to be smarter than the studios. We have to find those things that hit in those particular levels just because there's just no way that we can compete. If that's what the market wants, then by no means am I trying to force the market to take something else. I have to listen to what the distributors are saying. And unfortunately, you guys aren't the distributors. What you guys like really doesn't matter. It's what the distributors want, what they want to feed you. And that's what I have to feed them. And that's the cold hard fact. Now, what media it's on, well, that depends on a lot of different factors. But that's my money hoard greed talking there.
Is the question about also retaining rights?
I think the audience, let me speak for you. Yes.
To get the rights and be protected.
What should they be aiming for?
I have a quick response. So I would say, everything that we're doing right now, I think there's some similarities in our company's business models because we're driven also by our global sales and our international sales, and I would echo the genre piece. But I think for us, what I'm seeing now and what I would encourage you guys to do as well is it's kind of tying back into everything else we've been saying, but really making sure that you are locked in for that potential franchise opportunity with whatever your project is, sequels, blah, blah, blah. I mean, all those sorts of obvious things, but then also any spin-offs so that, because we're looking at a lot of stuff now, even as backdoor pilots or ways to launch into other avenues. So just making sure that you have all those bases covered.
And also foreign language remakes.
So what the language that you want to look for is you want to be locked for life for the project. So when you're optioning IP, perhaps right now you're optioning just for a nominal amount, and what instead is going to happen is when the studio picks it up, when they activate the purchase price, that's really when the underlying author will have their big payday. And what you want to make clear is that you are locked for life. So that would include a spin-off, a foreign, the Chinese version of XYZ movie. You want it to also be any derivative production, any spin-off. We saw those things happen at Legendary with films like Godzilla, where you really kind of got into the conversation of attachment. And right now, I see both points that are being brought up here, but you want to look at what has been successful. Looking at something like It, right? That was based on a Stephen King novel as well. And also looking at something that Newform is doing. So right now, MGM is kind of toying with the idea of rebooting Stargate. So they approached us about doing a digital show first to kind of work with the audience. But I would say to individuals out there, attaching yourself to IP, it can go both ways. You want to attach yourself to IP, though, that you are excited about. You want to look at what is in the market, and you want to be very smart and savvy about doing that. So you want to make sure that no matter what, you're locked for life. You want to think about anything that you're working on for it to have the greatest success imaginable. Imagine it being the next It, and so you protect yourself in that fashion.
As someone that acquires a lot of IP, and also we are in the business of obviously greenlighting a lot of original content as well on the short form side, I just want to encourage you all, for those of you guys that are looking to get rights to things, it isn't always about the money, and it isn't always about where your stature is in the industry. So much of it is really about passion and vision, and I think unfortunately in this system, that is kind of consumed by fear and greed, giving a buyer on the other end a leg up to say yes, that something has been vetted, that there's pre-existing material. We've seen higher conversion rates when things are based off pre-existing material. It could be an article. It could be actually a short form series. It could be anything that's gone out in the marketplace that is identified as, oh, there's some sort of proof of concept that's out there, there's some sort of execution, and there's some sort of vision or concept there that's of value. So we, as Adaptive Studios, publish 16 to 18 books per year. We have seen a higher conversion rate uniformly on anything that we go out and pitch when it's based off of pre-existing material. That's why we've gotten a deal with John Legend and Lionsgate. That is how we've got DC Trip set up, Coin Heist, you name it. Like, we have seen that, and actually, the data supports that. 60% of all Oscar films were based on pre-existing material. So in a system that is very much about executives keeping their jobs, no offense to anybody out there, but that's just the name of the game. You don't want to take those risks, or if you are, you really are putting your job on the line. You want to give people an opportunity to say yes, and we've seen that being able to secure rights and being passionate, even if you don't have money, and persistence, does win out at the end of the day more times than it doesn't.
All right, well, let's say that we've got our foot in the door and we have a deal. Are there any tips that you can give on how people can know whether they're getting a fair deal, and if they're getting even a good deal if there is no bidding war on their project?
A fair deal is what the market tells you. I mean, we say sometimes, we'll go all over town and try to set something up, and we get one offer, and the common refrain is the market has spoken. And I think that you don't really know, and you hope that you can have either representatives working on your behalf, or that you are able to do something in a way that is authentic and true to what you believe and what you're going to bat for. But at the end of the day, none of us know for sure what the market is going to dictate what something is worth until someone comes back and says what it's worth.
But there are a couple, for people who aren't surrounded by lawyers or agents and stuff. So there are some general guidelines that you can know. I mean, obviously, things like getting, an executive producer fee or whatever producer fee or whatever that is, there's always going to be a low end and there's always going to be a high end. There's always things like being attached for the life of a project as opposed to being, quote unquote, kicked off potentially after a season. There's always, your credit. So there's a couple key buckets you want to make sure you're always getting. And you kind of, depending on what your medium is, whether it's digital, feature, or TV, or reality, whatever, there are some easy things that you could find out either probably by Googling or just talking to any agent or lawyer, or probably anybody up here can give you, like, here are the 4 things, make sure you're just getting as best you can on.
I would agree. I would make a checklist for yourself. I would make sure that you have something written down as well if you're representing yourself in this matter. I would echo what was just said. You want to make sure that you're bringing up your credit. You want to make sure that you're bringing up your credit in all promotion of the show as well, so in all paid ads, depending on the medium, depending if they do or do not have paid ads. You want to think about your fee. You want to think about your back-end fee. You want to think about how your fee compares to other people they're bringing on to the project as well. So you want to think about the most favored nations concept, right? That you will be MFN with others on the project. That's often a way to get an edge up when you don't know if it's fair or not, or what they'll be doing. That's a way to make sure. You want to be thinking as well about attachment. You want to be locked for life. You don't want to be cut off. You want to be locked in any different type of the show. And then if it's your IP that you own, you want to think about reversion. If the show doesn't go anywhere, how are you going to get it back? So you want to think through how you're going to be getting it back as well. And that's really critical too. And because, yeah, and so those are the things, you really are your best advocate. And so you want to be going into these conversations as prepared as possible to really advocate for yourself in either your on camera or behind the camera, whatever your roles might be. And during the Q&A, we can kind of drill down into that as well. But be aggressive, because why not? Go ahead. There's no harm in asking. And the best agents and lawyers will be your zealous advocate. So do that for yourself as well. And ask questions. Why not? Hey, what did you pay XYZ showrunner for this? I noticed another show that you're doing. What did that person get paid? Am I on this scale? Am I on that? I want your A+ definition. Why not? Be bold.
I'd also say there's, as you think about ways to sort of help yourself, there's probably those 4 or 5 things that we all ask for that some studio person's going to say, you don't qualify that, you're not big enough, etc. Sometimes the trick is asking for things that they don't think are valuable because they're too down the road, but yet you might find valuable in success, right? Because the person on the other end in business affairs is just sort of like protecting what they have to tell their boss. Oh, I held the ground on Justin, and his EP fee is capped at this, great. But if you ask for something like, okay, I'll take that because that's the best deal you're going to get if you only have one buyer, but you might ask for, what if in season 3 my fee goes up by 20%?
Great point.
In their mind, they're like, season 3, I don't even know if we're going to sell this thing. That's like 5 years from now, and I'm not going to be in the business affairs job I'm in right now. So there's all these things, right? It's like, you got to remember that at the other end, there's a person, right? And they have to go to their boss and say, I held the line on this. What else did we give them? Oh, we gave them some branded integration rights that they'll never amount to anything. Well, they could amount to a huge amount. And as long as you guys as entrepreneurs are like Bruce Lee said, water. They always find the opening. So if you have something that they don't think is valuable and you can find what that is, as an entrepreneur, as a hustler, as someone who goes out there, you will find a way to monetize that and take advantage of that. And remember, what you're doing is, if this is your first thing you've sold, what you're trying to do is set up what the next thing is sold. So your deals are always getting better and better. And once you have it, you just keep pressing and pressing and pressing.
Justin, that's a really good point. It brings up a friend of mine who sold a project to at Sundance, bidding war, asked, it was a film, asked for TV rights, no. Asked for basically every rights under the sun, no, 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 no. Finally it was like, theater rights? And they said, okay, we'll give on that. And now he's making a very successful show on Broadway. So absolutely. You never know. So just keep on fighting for that extra thing. And 9 times out of 10 you might be able to get something.
The thing to that is that had they the person probably never thought, really what I need to do is live theatrical.
Right.
But simply because they had the right. Like, you have to remember that having any right creates an opening for you to figure out how to exploit it. Any right is valuable in your hands.
Another thing that's important to realize as well is we're a quote-based system. So Justin just hit on a really critical point in that this negotiation's not just about your first deal, it will inform your second and third and fourth. The first thing I do is say, what are their quotes, right? Often, though, you're setting one, so you might even want to be arguing for precedent. Maybe you don't want theatrical rights now. Maybe you don't want merchandise rights now, but you want to be able to advocate for your next project. Hey, I got that from XYZ studio. I want that now. And it's much easier for a BA exec to give you something when you've gotten it before. It's just the kind of way our industry works.
Precedent's a big deal.
We're a precedent-based system.
Yeah, but then then what happens? This drives me crazy. It's like you fight for these precedents, and then the network wakes up or the buyer wakes up and says, "Yeah, we're not doing that." Right? They say, they'll just literally just say, I know we've been, and this isn't just about an individual being pushed around,
and on the
a studio, like a buyer.
The feature side is
the
say, I know we've been doing business like this, but we're under pressure, so we're throwing the precedent out.
Well, on the feature side, what they'll do is wait until you're about 3 or 4 weeks out from production, and then come and ask you to reduce.
Know what you're talking about.
It's disgusting, and so sometimes you got to have the fortitude to say no. Because that is becoming a really bad precedent that studios are starting to employ now. It used to be just Dolgen at Paramount. And now every studio is doing it, and I'm telling you, if it happens to me and it happens to every movie, it's gonna happen to you. So sometimes they don't even care, they'll make a deal for you as a producer knowing they have no intention of living up to it. So sometimes the hardest thing to do is say, all right, don't. You guys are, a couple $1 million into this pre-production. Don't do it. I'm not reducing. Because you can save them more money and you're more valuable if you feel like you're getting paid what you're worth and you're not. So I do believe that precedent is important, but I also think the most important is know your worth and stick to it.
I agree with that. I'd also like to throw out there just a small caveat that what we're talking about up here right now is production deals. And they are extremely complex and complicated, and I hate to advocate for the lawyers, but I strongly suggest when you get into this position that you find counsel that you trust and you believe in. And it doesn't need to be, the top end, Loeb and Loeb, or whoever it might be. You just want to have somebody that you really trust looking out for you, because when you're doing your first deal or your second deal or your third or your 50th, there are things that come up that you never even thought of before, such as holding on to theatrical rights or merchandising rights, because this particular property might have some value in China or whatever it might be. So it's just one of those things that you really need to take a look at. One other thing too about talking about deals and deal making and the bidding wars and stuff like that. We've talked about production up here, but there's an area that is extremely complicated additionally to that, and that's when you're selling your movie. And you're selling your movie to distributors. And that includes all rights. I mean, I'm talking theatrical, VOD, SVOD, pay TV, airlines, everything like that, including digital rights. And again, that is an extremely complex area. And I've seen so many producers just destroy their film and not do it justice, because just because you thought you can make a film doesn't mean that you know how to sell it or distribute it. And there's so many people that I've met that go, I'm just going to self-distribute. And for some, depending on the film, it might be okay. But for the most part, it is a tricky, tricky industry out there that requires a lot of knowledge and experience to be able to navigate it. And so, again, I hate to advocate for it, but dealing with lawyers as well as sales agents when it comes to that particular area, I highly recommend, because it is a very, very difficult area. And bidding wars just don't exist anymore. I mean, they come up every so often, but they're unicorns when it comes to selling your film. And you have to really, you know who your market is and who your distributors and who you're working with, because most distributors do not want to deal with a producer.
We're getting a little bit low on time.
Yeah, sorry. So in closing, talk to your lawyer. There.
I will just give one caveat on behalf of the lawyers. Don't hire someone that's a real estate lawyer or something else, because those in the industry who are on the opposite side of you will know that, and you'll probably get a worse deal than if you just read through a contract or a deal term sheet yourself and just use your brain. So if you can't get a lawyer that actually does what they do for a living, because everything's super specialized, then try to use yourself. So we're going to open things up now for questions. Is there anybody yes? Do we need a microphone, or can you just shout loudly?
I was very intrigued by your rights conversation. So I'm an indie producer with a special interest in acquiring life rights from public figures. Most of the time they come to my attention through an article. So I'm wondering, is the time and dollars best spent acquiring that type of AP, or talk about maybe you should just go straight for the life rights, or do you need both? How have you guys?
Yeah, we've seen it a lot of different ways, but I think if you're looking at an article that's based off of someone's life and life rights, at the end of the day, you do need to go and get those life rights. And I think also having the family or that individual as an early advocate and partner with you gives you leverage over everything else. So in my experience, and this is just me talking, I would try to get the life rights first, but articles are very important as well.
There's also sometimes where there's these stories are so widely diffused in public domain that you don't need the life rights. Like, I don't think for the Social Network, for the Zuckerberg movie, they got life rights. I think there was just so much material in the court case that Sorkin could just pull from that. So it really depends on what it is and what story you want to tell also.
Well, I'll weigh in this because I've done several movies and acquired a number of true life stories for movies and for television, and I recommend doing that. And other than a public figure where you're going to be competing, I don't recommend it with a public figure where you don't need rights, because there are so many other people who could be competing with you for that project and for those rights, for that story, without having to buy the rights. I've acquired a number of true life stories, and I think that there's a real interest in that when it's a compelling story. If it's something, I think if it's completely unknown story, it doesn't work. If it's an overly well-known public story, it also has a downside. But if it's something that's known, but you have access to that story and you can get the rights, you have something that's got IP value to it. And I've been in one situation where we had a competing project where there's two people involved. I bought both life rights of both individuals. Another project came along that did not have any of those life rights, and we went after them and said, you can't do that story without having those rights, and they pretty much backed down. So it gives you a leverage, and especially if when you're working on it, it becomes more well known, you're vulnerable if you don't have those rights.
All right, the fellow in row 3.
Kind of attaching that has been spoken about during this session is web influencers. Can you talk a little about how important it is to attach a director, for example, which always seems to be the number one thing, or talent to getting projects off the ground or moving them forward from off the ground to the next stage?
I've done probably between Disney and Revolution as a producer more movie star movies than most people. It all depends, honestly. I mean, directors are hard because you lose them for a long time if you don't hit the slot that they're available in. So you got to be careful about that. First of all, you have to be careful that their movie that's either in the can or they just did was good, because that can take you out. And you got to make sure that they're not attached to like 5 or 6 things, because if you get into a queue, it can take a long time. But yes, having any sort of talent attached that's a motivator for a buyer is always a good thing, as long as they're right for the material. You don't want to be, out shopping a comedian's passion project to play a, blind beggar. That's probably not the best attachment. But if you can find an actor on the upswing or somebody that's got heat behind them and are right for the role, it's definitely a helpful attachment. But it depends also if you're selling to a studio or if like a split rights deal, because if you're in a split rights deal, then it's a whole other can of worms, because there's only so many actors that work for the foreign market. So you end up, if you've ever gone to AFM or Toronto, you end up with a lot of posters with John Travolta on them. And so you got to be careful, because not all the attachment might not be real, and you're chasing the same 5 actors. And so attaching is a tough business. You have to have, generally you have to have the relationships, unless the material is just so stellar that you get lucky and Jennifer Lawrence reads your script and you get an incoming call. But if you're out and you have a piece of material that you're calling agents to try to get attachments, it's going to be a grind.
But philosophically, the idea is, if you're starting without sort of all the advantages of being in a studio system or a well-known producer, is finding ways in which to take what you think is a fantastic thing to lend an era of credibility that someone else has blessed it, right? So that's what attachment means, right? It's like whether it's a director, an actor, or a director as an EP or whatever, but obviously you can sort of start making your project seem more viable by giving it the blessing of other people who are well known to your buyers in some way.
Or another producer. DeLuca attached
Right.
Scott Rudin to 2 of his movies and won 2 Academy Awards. So
Yeah.
Sometimes a big producer can help you, like Mr. Sugarman.
We're down to the
there.
wire now, so let's try to get in a couple final quick questions. I guess that person in the back had first, and then we'll do you, and then, so we'll just give some quick answers because we've got to get off here quickly. Thank you.
That is a really good question, and it's really, really difficult. First thing to do is just wipe your brain clear of any stereotypes that you have of the Chinese market and start fresh. Best thing to do is to really partner up with, find, network, and talk to people about the Chinese market. And just like anywhere else, there's going to be a lot of people that know, well, they think they know something about a particular industry or whatever it might be. You're just going to have to do your research. It is really tough. It's taken us 15 years penetrating the Chinese market, and we're now just getting a tight foothold there to be able to get around all the. There's so much censorship, there's SAR permits, there's SAFE permits, there's so much that needs to be done. There's got to be Chinese elements. Getting back to the gentleman here asked about the director, one thing that wasn't mentioned is that you need to know where your film is being shot, how you're basing it, because you're going to need those elements, whether it needs to be a Chinese director or whatnot. So it's those types of things to keep in mind as well.
We're being kicked off. Can you make your question a 1-second one and 1-second answers? Because we've got to get off. Thanks.
Well, generally, it's not enough just to have the story. That's the beginning. You really need to be able to have some means to develop it, either into a screenplay or into another IP that allows you to then have a platform to jump off and make it as whether it's a movie or a television series. But to just go pitch somebody saying, I have these life rights, unless it is somebody of such tremendous fame that you happen to luck into getting that, you might be able to get a development deal, but otherwise you're going to have to develop something off of those rights.
Well, thank you very much to our wonderful panel, and thank you, audience. Oh, sorry. Did I interrupt you?